Creepy Stories Volume 3. My uncle told me this story, his personal experience with his friend Ronnie. One day, Ronnie was browsing on the internet. He read a story about a certain suspension bridge that was located close to his home. The website had plenty of pictures of the bridge and the surrounding area. The next time he met my uncle, he told him about the bridge. It was an old suspension bridge that crossed over a deep gorge. For some unknown reason, it was known as a spot that was notorious for suicides. Every year, at least 5 or 10 people would throw themselves off the bridge and died. Nobody could explain why. They said that the spot was haunted by the ghosts of all the people who had committed suicide there. When my uncle went home that evening, he decided that he had to check out the bridge. He desperately wanted to see a ghost. So, that very night, he set out for the mountains where the bridge was located. It took him about half an hour to get there. It was almost midnight when he arrived at the bridge, and there was not a single person around. It was dark and deathly quiet. The atmosphere was so spooky and ominous that it sent a chill down his spine. People just fool others about this place, he muttered to himself as he cautiously walked to the edge of the gorge and peered down into its depths. He began thinking about all of the people who had thrown themselves down into the inky blackness. It was so fascinating that he felt forced to tell his friend, Ronnie, about it. So he pulled out his cell phone to call him. However, since he was high up in the mountains, he couldn't get any reception. Looking around, my uncle noticed a phone booth standing nearby. He went inside, put some coins in the slot, and dialed Ronnie's number. "Hello, Ronnie. Guess who's speaking?" he said. "I am at the same bridge that you told me earlier. Why don't you join me tonight? It's so pleasant and quiet here." "Why not?" replied Ronnie. "I have seen that place on Google." "Wait there, I am coming. By the way, where are you calling from?" My uncle laughed. "Oh, my phone is out of range. So, I am calling from a payphone." His friend was confused. "Payphone? There is no payphone there. If there was any, I would have seen it on photos." "Bullshit. There is a payphone on the way to bridge. Now, don't delay. There are people waiting outside for their turn." As soon as he said this, Ronnie shouted, "No, don't move from there. I know that place and I coming in 15 minutes. Just stay inside payphone and don't put down the phone." "What happened? Just promise me you won't move from there. Whatever others say, just don't move from there." When his friend hung up, my uncle felt a wave of fear envelop him. He didn't put down his phone. The people outside booth were staring at him. The look in their eyes sent a shiver down his spine. 15 minutes later, when Ronnie arrived at the suspension bridge, he found his friend standing at the very edge of the bridge. He was holding his cell phone against his ear. He had no clue what he is doing. There was no phone booth and no line of people waiting to use the phone. If he had moved an inch, he would have fallen off the edge and died. When you are admitted to a hospital, they place on your wrist a white wristband with your name on it. But there are other different colored wristbands which symbolize other things. The red wristbands are placed on dead people. There was one surgeon who worked on night shift in a school hospital. He had just finished an operation and was on his way down to the basement. He entered the elevator, and there was just one other person there. He casually chatted with the woman while the elevator descended. When the elevator door opened, another woman was about to enter when the doctor slammed the close button and punched the button to the highest floor. Surprised, the woman reprimanded the doctor for being rude and asked why he did not let the other woman in. The doctor said, "That was the woman I just operated on. She died while I was doing the operation. Didn't you see the red wristband she was wearing?" The woman smiled, raised her arm, and said something like this. There was a hunter in the woods who, after a long day hunting, was in the middle of an immense forest. It was getting dark, and having lost his bearings, he decided to head in one direction until he was clear of the increasingly oppressive foliage. After what seemed like hours, he came across a cabin in a small clearing. Realizing how dark it had grown, he decided to see if he could stay there for the night. He approached and found the door ajar. Nobody was inside. The hunter flopped down on the single bed, deciding to explain himself to the owner in the morning. As he looked around the inside of the cabin, he was surprised to see the walls adorned by several portraits, all painted in incredible detail. Without exception, they appeared to be staring down at him, their features twisted into looks of hatred and malice. Staring back, he grew increasingly uncomfortable. Making a concerted effort to ignore the many hateful faces, he turned to face the wall, and exhausted, he fell into a restless sleep. The next morning, the hunter awoke. He turned, blinking in unexpected sunlight. Looking up, he discovered that the cabin had no portraits, only windows. One night, the last bus of line 375 had one driver, one conductor, and two passengers, an elderly guy and a young man. The bus next to last stop was located near a graveyard, and this night, when the bus stopped, two men carrying a third man got on the bus. Soon after the bus took off, the elderly guy suddenly started to argue with the young man, accusing him of stealing his money. The young man insisted on his innocence. The conductor got tired of it. It was the last shift, and he really didn't want to deal with it. So, he asks the driver to stop the bus and asked the two passengers to get off the bus. The two got off, and the young man said to the old guy, "Why are you accusing me of stealing? I didn't do anything." The old man said, "You should thank me for saving your life." The two guys carrying the third guy, none of them were alive. The bus went missing that night. It never arrived at the last stop, and no one knows what happened. Later the bus was found in some random roadside ditch. Both driver and conductor were dead. The three men were nowhere to be found. A man went to a hotel and walked up to the front desk to check in. The woman at the desk gave him his key and told him that on the way to his room, there was a door with no number that was locked, and no one was allowed in there. She explained that it was a storeroom, and that it was out of bounds. She reminded him of this several times before allowing him upstairs, so he followed the instructions of the woman at the front desk, going straight to his room and going to bed. However, the insistence of the woman had piqued his curiosity, so the next night he walked down the hall to the door and tried the handle. Sure enough, it was locked. He bent down and looked through the wide keyhole. Cold air passed through it, chilling his eye. What he saw was a hotel bedroom, like his, and in the corner was a woman whose skin was incredibly pale. She was leaning her head against the wall, facing away from the door. He stared in confusion for a while. Was this a celebrity? The owner's daughter? He almost knocked on the door, out of curiosity, but decided not to. As he was still looking, the woman turned sharply, and he jumped back from the door, hoping she would not suspect he had been spying on her. He crept away from the door and walked back to his room. The next day, he returned to the door and looked through the wide keyhole. This time, all he saw was redness. He couldn't make anything out besides a distinct red color, unmoving. Perhaps the inhabitants of the room knew he was spying the night before, and had blocked the keyhole with something red. He felt embarrassed that he had made the woman so uncomfortable, and hoped she had not made a complaint with the woman on the front desk. At this point he decided to consult her for more information. After some gentle quizzing and the promise that the explanation would go no further than him, she finally said, "Well, I might as well tell you the story of what happened in that room. A long time ago, a man murdered his wife in there. We find that even now, people get uncomfortable staying there. But these people were not ordinary. They were white all over, except for their eyes, which were red." Rewind many years ago. I was a kid, and our parents used to celebrate our birthdays with the gang of kids in our neighborhood. During those days, the parties are thrown in the evenings, the usual cake cutting and games and all. So, this one birthday, we were playing hide and seek, and I was doing the seeking. This was around 8 p.m. and it was pretty dark. I lived in a compound which had two buildings and quite a lot of space in the front and in the back of the houses. There was a well in the back and a small garden. So I start off looking for the guys one by one and managed to find all but one. If I find this last one, I no longer need to be the seeker. I run around the houses, looking for him, and then I decide to run into my house and see if he is hiding in one of the rooms. I quickly scan the hall and run over to the bedroom. There are no lights on in the bedroom. I quickly look under the bed and see him down there. His eyes and his smile are crystal clear to me. I jump up with joy, run out of the house and to the point where all are gathered to say all out, and I see that guy who I thought was under the bed, standing there with the rest. I didn't have the guts to go back and check under the bed, and there was only one way out of the house, and I got out that way. Till this day this incident is clear in my mind and gives me the shivers. I don't know what I saw. I still remember that eerie smile and face looking at me as if it were yesterday. About 5 years ago I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite. But all of that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police-patrolled park, quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street, on my side, was the silhouette of a man, dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking, headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky, and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still, until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off of him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back, and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me but still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I had put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments I felt relieved, until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time, staring at him, and then he started moving toward me again. He took giant, exaggerated tiptoed steps, as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone, except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point I ran away or pulled out my pepper spray or my cell phone or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen as the smiling man crept toward me. And then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling his smile, still looking to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What the fuck do you want?" In an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper. What the few. Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling, and then, After what felt like forever, he turned around, very slowly, and started walking away, just like that. Not wanting to turn my back to him again, I just watched him go, until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror, as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way, and this time he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off of the side road, and back onto a better lit road, with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile. But he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk. He didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane. And that's a very, very scary thing to see.
Thanks for watching. Keep enjoying our videos. Like and subscribe.